Welcome to Lesson 6, Color Correcting an Image. In this lesson, you're going to find out about neutrals and how to use curves. So this is the done file, and I'm going back to File, Browse, and Bridge, and I am selecting the start file. And you'll notice they're slightly different. Okay, this one has a little bit more flesh tone in it. He looks a little bit more bright, and it's a little bit more clear. In this image, you can see in contrast that this image is a little bit more gray, perhaps washed out. His flesh tone doesn't look as healthy. Now, a lot of this stuff can be resolved rather quickly by taking advantage of curves. Let me show you what you need to pay attention to first. Up here at the top, you can see that I'm in RGB mode, and some of your colors may not appear on your screen exactly as they're going to print if you're working in RGB mode. But when you're color correcting, you always want to stay in RGB. In fact, you want to stay in it as long as you possibly can before you make decisions about where the file's going to go. So in other words, if this were going to be printed and you were sending it to a color copier, you would keep it RGB, and the color copier would do the translation into cyan, magenta, yellow, black. If you were going to a pre-press house that was going to take your image and actually put it on a press that prints cyan, magenta, yellow, black, then they might want to convert the file to CMYK or give you settings that you want to use. But the main thing I want you to understand here is that we're staying in RGB, but if I want to see how it's going to look when it prints, I can select View Proof Colors. And you'll see that the proof setup in this case has been set up for CMYK, but I could also change it to Legacy Macintosh or Internet Standard RGB. I am selecting Proof Colors, and you'll see that I have a check mark on, which means it's already been applied to my image. And you also see in the tab RGB/8/CMYK, meaning that this image is in RGB, but it's in a CMYK preview. So you can keep that on if you plan on printing this image, so you can get a more realistic look as to how it's going to appear when printed. If this is for the web, you can turn that off. Let's get started. Under Window, you have something called histogram. And histogram, history, kind of works like both, but essentially it's giving you data about how much information this image has. There's a yield sign there right now indicating that I need to update this, so I click on that and it goes away. This image has a lot of information in it. Now, I'm going to intentionally ruin this image, which might be something that you might do unintentionally, or if you have a poor camera or a scanner, it might come into Photoshop this way. But I'm going to Image Adjustment, and I'm selecting Posterize and setting this for 16 levels. Now, again, I'm intentionally ruining this so that you can see what a histogram looks like when it's good versus bad. Now, you can see all those nice shades of color, because that's what the histogram represents. Your tonal values have all been thrown away, and now I'm left with only 16 shades. And now you can see those shades going from one blend into another, and it's doing something that looks like banding. And banding is this effect when you have the striping, when you have something that should be a nice smooth gradient. The reason I bring this up is because many people work in Photoshop incorrectly, and as they are making changes, they are ruining the histogram or ditching information that they need. So in other words, if I simply go under Edit, Undo, Posterize, but I come in here and I do Image Adjustment and I choose Levels, which is a feature that a lot of people use, you'll notice that as I work in here and push and pull these items around, no matter what I'm doing, you'll see that I'm throwing away important data. And if I were to click OK, and I'll update that, and then maybe I go back and I say, oh, you know what? I should also come in here and adjust the brightness and contrast. You'll notice brightness, contrast, click OK. Every time I do this, I'm destroying this information more and more. So even though my image might look okay, I'm throwing away valuable data that is going to show up, especially in the shadow areas. You'll start seeing that banding or that striping. So this is why I try to teach people how to use curves and something called adjustment layers, because curves allows you to do many of the things that you would have to do in other features all in one window, and it also gives you the opportunity when you're using adjustment layers to turn it off or on or make changes to the same curve instead of reapplying them over and over again. I'm going under File and I'm selecting Revert, update my histogram again, and I'm going to show you how you can improve your tonal value and remove color casts from your images by using curves. To start out with, I'm going to use a different technique than I have in the book, which is a little bit easier actually. I'm selecting Image Adjustment and I'm selecting Threshold. Now why I am doing this is because I want to find the lightest and darkest part of this image. So you'll notice that what Threshold does is it brings down the levels to either black or white. And when I slide this slider to the left, the darkest part of this image is left intact. And I can hold my Shift key down and click on that, and it leaves a little marker or a color sampler. Now I'm sliding this to the right, and I'm selecting the lightest part of this image. Most importantly, I am selecting Cancel. If you click OK, your image will be left looking like this, which isn't very good. You can always press Command or Control Z to undo it, leave your color samplers, and then continue working. But I'm clicking on Cancel. I'm now going over to my Layers panel and I'm going to pull it out so you can see it a little bit better. And I am selecting the New Fill or Adjustment Layer button and I'm selecting Curves. And now I'm going to set what I want my lightest and darkest point to be in the image. So you'll notice that I have these eyedroppers over here. Sample in the image white point, sample in the image black point, and also gray point. I'm double clicking on the white point and I'm going to set this for the minimum light point that I want, and I'm just going to use the default, which is 533, which is a great value to use if you don't know what else to use. Now I am setting this in CMY, but it doesn't really matter. I'm still working in RGB. That's just a value that I know works well whether you're creating images on the web or for print. It's a nice light color to use. And the reason why you want to set the white point at some value is because you can get some really weird effects on both screen and print if you have the lightest part of your image stark white, unless it's something like a specular highlight, like a shiny bumper or a piece of jewelry or something like that. I wanted to maintain the target values, yes. Now I don't have to set my black point if I've gone into Edit Color Settings and I've set these correctly. And so if I select Edit Color Settings, you can see that as a default it's set for North American General Purpose 2, which means I don't know where you're going. Are you going to the web? Are you going to print? If I am going to print, I want to make sure that I change this to North American Pre-Press 2, and that actually sets my black point to the right values so that it prints correctly. If you're doing web, of course, you can also come in here to Color Settings and you can simply choose North American Web Internet. I'll stick with Pre-Press for this one. Now I take my highlight, this little button, I make sure it's active, you can see it's selected, and I click where I found my lightest point. I take my shadow and I click where I found my darkest point. I can also grab the midpoint and visually just make some changes in here to lighten or darken the image. You'll notice that what's represented here is your mid-tone, quarter tone, and three-quarter tone values so that you can actually adjust these yourself. I'm not going to do a whole lot to this right now. In fact, I'm going to eliminate this anchor point by dragging it right off and just maybe lighten it up slightly for right now. Now I have one more thing I need to do, and that is I need to get rid of a color cast that's in here. And so I'm going to move this stuff around. And in order to get rid of a color cast, you can use this set gray point. Now you can either do this manually throughout an image, or you can do a little bit of a cheat and use this eyedropper tool. And what it allows you to do is to find something that you know is neutral in your image. And a neutral, of course, is anything that is equal amounts of RGB or should be. So this will be shades of white or gray. Typically like a middle gray would be good. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and take that eyedropper tool and click on his shirt because that's a gray shirt. And you can see it instantly makes the image look a little bit brighter. It neutralizes that gray, so it actually is now equal amounts of red, green, blue, and that also helps the skin tone as well. We're done with that. I'm going to go ahead and close the Properties panel and show you that by using an adjustment layer, you can turn this off or on, which means that if I want to go back at any time and change this, I can double click on this and then I can make additional adjustments if I need to. And it doesn't degrade or hurt the image anymore. One last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to click on the background. So I'm clicking over in my Layers panel on the actual image area. And I'm going under Filter, Sharpen, Unsharp Mask. And how this works is that as a default, Photoshop has set up the sharpening to go up to 50%. You can actually go up to 500% sharpening, and depending upon the subject matter that your image has, you would select more or less. So maybe for a car ad, a picture of an automobile or a washing machine, you might be really high in the 400s. But then once you have people, certainly somebody like a woman over 40, you probably don't want to go over 150 because all the details that maybe they don't want shown all of a sudden appear. So I can change the preview in here by just clicking on a part of the image. It's showing it to me uncorrected because the curves panel is above, but that's okay. I'm going to slide this over and you'll notice that as I slide it up, it becomes more crisp. If I go too far, you'll see that it produces a lot of noise. That's not only because of the large amount, but because of the threshold. The threshold set right now is at 0, which means that Photoshop, which is looking for levels of contrast to determine what should be sharpened, is seeing every single pixel and saying, all right, if you are slightly different, even one tiny little bit of a level different from the pixel next to you, you must have a certain level of contrast, which means you must be an edge, and I'm going to put a halo around you, creating this noisy look. What you want to make sure you instruct Photoshop to do is say, hey, if the pixel next to me is within 10 shades of what I am, it's not an edge, and don't sharpen it. Keep it smooth. And so you can see a huge difference right here in the skin when I slide the threshold down to 0 or when I change it to 10, because the eye is still being sharpened, because obviously that wrinkle in the lid and the eyelashes are more than 10 shades different than the skin around them, but they really are an edge and it recognizes them as such now. So once you've set the sharpening, and I'm going to put this down to a more reasonable level, children can be around 200%. They have less flaws to show. But when I click OK, you'll see that when I go to the history panel up here, you can see pretty big difference, especially in details like the eyes. So in this lesson, you discovered how you can quickly and easily color correct an image using curves. This has been Jennifer Smith with Digital Classroom.